Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. Breaking news at this moment. You see the IDF tweeting here. The operational pauses will continue in light of the mediators' efforts to continue the process of releasing the hostages and to subject the terms to the framework. Now, this is big news that we've been waiting on for the last few days, ever since this ceasefire first started, and we saw the progress being made when it comes to this war, the hostages being released. We also saw Palestinians that have been held prisoner in Israel be turned over to officials in Palestine. Let's take a live look out there at Gaza at this moment. Local time there just past 7 o'clock in the morning. So today was day 6, where we saw another 16 hostages released by Hamas, including one Israeli-American woman. For the latest on where this hostage deal stands, that now we know it's going to be continued, we're joined by visiting assistant professor at UCI and Israel Institute fellow, Dr. Alon Burstein. Alon, we've had you on the program before, completely breaking down all of this, and you actually tweeted right when you saw that this development was going to be happen. So tell me, what are the reports? This is big news right now. Break it down for our viewers.
So first of all, thank you for having me. It's nice to be back. The initial truce was a 4-day truce. It was a 4-day truce in which there was a deal that Hamas was going to release 50 hostages, women and minors under the age of 19. Israel was going to release 150 Palestinian prisoners, specifically 3 prisoners for each hostage that is released, and that in turn, humanitarian aid is going to be allowed to flow into the Gaza Strip. According to the initial terms of the deal, Hamas could, quote unquote, buy itself another day of truce if it would release upwards of 10 more hostages that meet the criteria, i.e. women or minors under the age of 19. And that's what happened already after 4 days. The truce was extended by 2 days, and each day Hamas has released 10 hostages in exchange for also 30 Palestinian prisoners, and the truce continued and humanitarian aid continued to flow in. What happened today is that the truce was due to expire literally 8 minutes ago, and then Israel had stated that if Hamas wants, it can still extend the truce. It can still release another 10 women and children. And even if they don't have an official deal, even if the sides don't agree on it, if Hamas just transfers over a list and says that it is going to release those 10 women and children in the next 24 hours, Israel will agree to abide by the truce. Hamas did not do that. Throughout the day, it stated that it is happy to release other groups, possibly older men, possibly other things. And Israel kept on saying that it is not willing to accept that it will only adhere to the initial truce. Otherwise, the fire is going to resume at what would be 7 a.m. in the Middle East, or midnight in the East Coast, or 9 p.m. in the West Coast. And then Hamas transferred over, as I said in the tweet here, Hamas transferred over a list of 10 names. However, they also said that they would release 7 women and children and only add 3 dead bodies that they had kidnapped or people that had died in captivity. And this Israel rejected, and both sides were preparing for battle. El Qassam brigades of Hamas stated they're preparing to resume fire. Israel said it was going to resume fire. Literally 15 minutes before fire was supposed to resume, Hamas did apparently manage to find more people to meet the criteria. They have now transferred over a list of 10 hostages that will be released in the next 24 hours. Israel has not published that list, so I cannot confirm that it is in fact only women and children. Maybe it does include men, but it is all live hostages. And the truce is continuing now for another 24 hours.
I want to stay on some of these concerns that some of these hostages are dead. They could be missing. Now, are these valid concerns? I mean, possibly, because this delay, it took so long for them to hand over another list.
So we know that 1 or 2 hostages died in captivity. And I say died because it is not confirmed at all that they were executed. The Hamas actually released that these were elderly men. One of them at least was an elderly man that had heart condition, and Hamas showed that he was being given medical attention and then he died. There are reports of others that may have died. Hamas kept on stating that Israeli hostages are in danger as a result of the bombings. And that was their way of applying pressure on Israel to say, stop the bombings because you are endangering your own hostages. Then there is disagreement between Israel and Hamas about one of the IDF's female soldiers that had died in captivity. According to Hamas, she had died as a result of the bombing. Israel stated that her body was recovered in Al-Shifa hospital. Israel stated that in a bombing she was injured, but she was actually then killed in the hospital. The reports are conflicting about that. And Right now, Hamas is holding on to at least several people who died in captivity. Hamas also kidnapped bodies of presumably soldiers, but not only, that it had killed on October 7th. So there are definitely dead bodies that Hamas is holding on to as part of bargaining and negotiations. This has happened before in the Middle East, both with Hamas and Hezbollah, that they have traded dead bodies in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. That definitely exists. Israel is saying it's not going to even discuss the dead bodies until all the live hostages are returned. There is one issue that is surfacing in the last 24 hours, a family that has become famous in Israel, the Bivas family, which is the youngest people who were kidnapped, a 10-month-old baby and his 4-year-old brother and the two parents. Hamas today stated that the mother and two babies had died in a bombing. This is completely unconfirmed. I've been asked about that many times throughout the day. I said I don't necessarily believe it yet, just because Hamas did not publish that in their official channels. It's more a rumor that they're spreading. The IDF said that it's examining the intelligence. So I don't know. They may be part of the deceased in captivity also or not. I really don't know about that. But it is for sure that there are dead bodies also in captivity.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I've also read reports of Hamas saying that these people are either dead or they've gone missing and yet they're still held in captivity. I mean, why so many rumors? Is this just a disorganization? Is that the cause?
Well, there's the official reasons and the unofficial reasons. The official reasons is disorganization. The Gaza Strip is in complete disarray. The north of the Strip has been completely pummeled to the ground. There are upwards of 1.8 million people internally displaced. So there is complete disarray. The attack on October 7th involved many different organizations. So that's Hamas's claim. Their claim is that they don't know where everyone was held. Some people were kidnapped by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They then claimed that the Bivas family was held by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is a group that dates back to the 70s, still exists, by no means has the strength to hold on to captives itself. Only if Hamas told them to hold on to captives, they would. But they're claiming that it's a result of disarray. More likely, there's also disarray, but also this is a tactic. This is a strategic tool. Hamas can say, look, we can release these hostages, for example, the 10 they're going to release, hopefully in the next 24 hours. They can say, these are the ones we can release. We don't know about the Bivas family. They're held by a different organization. If you want to negotiate with them, you have to pay a higher price. If you want to do that, you have to pay a higher price. So it's also a negotiating tactic. It's probably disarray, but also it's part of a tactic. Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, I don't like giving the man compliments. He's exceedingly smart. Is known to speak fluent Hebrew. He looks at the news in Israel every night. This is all reports from intelligence. He knows Israeli society. So, for example, the Bivas family, one of the reasons I said I'm not sure I believe it yet, and I was hoping that, of course, that they're alive, but I'm not sure I believe it yet, is because they have made the news in Israel. There are specific protests in Israel about their release. So it doesn't surprise me that Hamas understands, okay, a pressure valve is to 2 days ago say they're held by someone else. If you want them, you have to pay more. Now to say, you know what, maybe they're dead. You want more information? You have to accept our terms. It's a negotiating tactic in addition to the disarray by Hamas. It's a very smart organization.
Alon, I want to go back to a tweet because you have been detailing this on your account on X. Take a look at this when I bring it up here. Talking about that initial deal that Israel rejected this list. Now, are the negotiations getting more difficult as this ceasefire continues?
Both sides are trying to establish their bargaining positions for when the ceasefire or truce, as they like to call it in Israel. They don't like to call it a ceasefire because that implies more long term, but it is effectively a ceasefire. Both sides are trying to solidify their bargaining positions for when it ends. It has an expiry date. When I said that Hamas, according to the initial terms, can buy itself an extra day, that is to a maximum of 10 days, according to the initial terms. So there is a maximum of another 4 days when, if the new deal is negotiated, it has to be reapproved by Hamas, Qatar, Israel, and anyone else who might be involved. So both sides are trying to entrench themselves now to say, okay, what's next? What comes after this? Hamas is trying, their strategy appears to be to try to prolong this truce and then let it bleed automatically into the next truce, in which they're going to start to release more elderly men. And their hope is to almost drag Israel into somewhat of a war of attrition and drag it out so that if Israel wants to resume its military operations, it will not be accepted by the international community. It will be seen, wait a minute, you've had a ceasefire for 3 weeks, you released their hostages, what are you doing? That seems to be their positions. Israel is adamant about the fact that it is going to return to full force in order to dismantle Hamas after the truce is over. And so each side is also just increasing their bargaining position. Today, for example, was reported that in a meeting that happened yesterday in Doha, in Qatar, between a very high profile meeting between the head of the Mossad in Israel, the head of the CIA, the Egyptian intelligence minister, and the prime minister of Qatar, that the sides, Qatar as representing Hamas, the sides had agreed to breaking down the hostages that are still in captivity into 5 criteria. These were elderly men, that is, men that are over the age of like reserve military duty in Israel, then younger men, then female soldiers, then male soldiers, and then bodies. As disgusting as it sounds that we're sort of like evaluating what is the price of human life, what that is each side saying, okay, what are we going to negotiate next? What is going to be our next term? We'll negotiate elderly men. We're willing to give these amount of Palestinian prisoners, these amount of days of truce, as opposed to IDF soldiers. Hamas has said if Israel wants to release its male IDF soldiers, it has to release all Palestinian prisoners. Like each one of them has, each category has, again, it's disgusting to say, its own price. And that is what both sides are trying to do in order to like solidify their bargaining position. So it's not so much that necessarily the negotiations have gotten harder, but each side, it's very important to them to say, like, these are my red lines. I'm going to push you now a little further. I'm going to bluff you a little further.
Alon, let's talk about the developments today. So, in this new group of hostages that was released, we saw 2 American citizens, a 3-year-old and a 49-year-old. So, could we see other Americans released in these next few days?
I'd like to say yes. I'd like to say that anyone who can be released obviously is a blessing. Russia has been very involved, and Hamas has been negotiating seemingly with Russia directly to release its own citizens. And today, Hamas released 2 Russian citizens, Russian Israelis, without any reward. Israel did not release any Palestinian prisoners as a gesture to Russia. So, like I said, Hamas is smart. They know that people with different citizenships matter to different countries. They know that the United States is looking at the U.S. citizens, and they know that that's a pressure valve on Israel. In my opinion, Hamas is going to use that pressure valve very strategically. For example, next time negotiations may break down, they may say, look, we're willing to now release only 4 hostages. I'm just making a number up. We're willing to release 4 hostages, but they'll all be American citizens in exchange for a day of truce. That will be a pressure valve to try to get President Biden to call Netanyahu and say, accept that. I want the citizens released. So we are going to likely see them released because Hamas is smart. He knows that they're valuable, but not necessarily that fast, because he also, because they're valuable, wants to hold on to them as the bargaining chips for future developments. But again, it really matters what category they're in. It really matters to Hamas if people are soldiers when they were kidnapped, if they are potential reserve soldiers, because in Israel, every citizen is a potential soldier to be called up to reserve duty until specific age brackets, depending on what their job in the military was. And as far as Hamas is concerned, this is just part of their own ideology. It matters greatly. Civilians, they are possibly willing to release for less. Soldiers, they see as bargaining chips for more, which has proven itself historically. Again, in 2011, they released 1 soldier in exchange for over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. So they recognize their bargaining chips here.
I want to stay on this topic of bargaining chips, and it sounds so horrible to say it. I agree with you on that because these are human lives. And I want to go back to this family that you had mentioned previously. Take a look at this tweet from the IDF talking about the Bibas family and how their story has really captivated the world, Israel. You see the photos there. You see the mother, the children. What kind of weight do they have here? Do you think that Hamas is going to be using them almost like that leverage, that bargaining chip that you're mentioning when it comes to perhaps American hostages or things of that sort?
Unfortunately, very much so. I think that, again, like I said, the leaders of Hamas are very, very smart. They are tapped into the Israeli mentality. They know what are the pressure valves on Israel. They know that this family has tapped into Israeli mentality. Everyone in Israel has seen these pictures 1,000 times over. Everyone in the United States who's following the war knows who this family is. That almost unfortunately makes them very valuable. That means that Hamas could agree to release them in exchange for a higher price or continuously hold them back. It's been reported in the Israeli media, but also international media almost every day in the last 3 days, the Bibas family is not included. That's valuable to Hamas because the fact that we're talking about it now, I'm not saying that we're doing something wrong, we're media, but the fact that we're talking about it now makes them valuable. Now, Hamas in the last few days did interesting things with regards to this family. At first, they stated that they are in Han Yunis, which is the biggest city in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. That unto itself is important because right prior to the truce, Israel had turned its sights on Han Yunis. It had started carrying out bombing campaigns in Han Yunis. It actually started alerting Palestinian civilians in different neighborhoods in Han Yunis where they have evacuated from the north that they are to evacuate certain neighborhoods in that town itself. So that was the first strategic move of Hamas, saying, just so you know, this family is in Han Yunis. Second, they said that the family is being held by a different organization. That's also a way to say, we're not necessarily not releasing them. We don't know. We don't know. We'll release them when we can release them, as opposed to Israel, for example, saying, you will extend the truce now in exchange for specifically that family. Israel sort of loses that bargaining chip if Hamas says, well, they're not held by us, they're held by someone else. Now, today, they announced that the mother and two children have been killed in an Israeli bombing. Like I said, I don't really know what to do with that. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad also announced previously that an elderly woman was killed in an Israeli bombing. She was then released alive. So these organizations have no problem lying and stating that people are dead when they are alive as a pressure valve. I'm not sure I can say what would be Hamas's interest in doing that, other than, again, making itself relevant. And if they were to say, for example, in 2 days from now, or another 24 hours, when the truce is about to expire, if they were to say, actually, it turns out we found them, they're alive, now will you extend the truce by another 24 hours? That is a game that they're playing. It's a game that they're playing because, like I said, the organization knows how to tap into the different psyches of its enemies, Israel, but also the United States, for that matter. And that's why that family has become very important, almost to their disadvantage.
Alon, I do want to get your final thoughts here as we near the end of our conversation. We are approaching day 60 of this war. This truce has been extended, so an exchange is going to continue between Hamas and Israel. What are you looking out for in these next few days?
Mostly, I am looking out for what each side is willing to give to continue the truce. Israel, to large extents, does not have an interest in the truce continuing. Israel's losing momentum because Israel wanted to continue the war. The only interest it has is in releasing hostages. That is the only reason why it's willing to give a truce. In turn, Hamas has a vested interest in prolonging the truce. It needs breathing room. It needs to show the Palestinian civilians that it is trying to increase humanitarian aid and needs a moment to recover from Israel's massive bombardment and to replan itself logistically. And I'm mostly seeing how each side is escalating to what they're willing to give. Today, it was fascinating as I was following it moment by moment. And I see that Hamas says that they are going to release Russian citizens. And then Russia's embassy in Israel says that Russia is actually in coordination with Hamas to possibly release more citizens. Then, all of a sudden, Osama Hamdan, who is Hamas's leader in Lebanon, says the group would be happy to release elderly men as well. So again, that's almost Hamas saying we're willing to negotiate now the next bracket. Like I said, this is divided into different brackets of hostages. Israel then said we're willing to accept elderly male hostages, but only after the release of all women and children. Then Hamas gave this list saying these are all the women and children we have. It turns out the Bibas family is killed. So most of what I am looking at is how each side is trying to strategically place itself in order to apply more pressure on the other side. And mostly when Israel is going to decide it's no longer in its interest. For example, I do genuinely believe that Israel was prepared to start the fire again 25 minutes ago. It was prepared to say, if Hamas is now going to say we only have dead bodies to give, we may as well continue the war. And in a week from now, Hamas is going to be even more pressure to get a truce, and they'll be willing to give something else. So it's really, again, it's sort of disgusting to talk about it like this, but it's a game of chicken between both sides. What are you willing to give versus what are you willing to get? And what I'm looking at is how each side is trying to read the map of the other side and say, I know this is important to you. Israel says, I know, Hamas, you want a truce. So give me this, and I'm just willing to give that to you. And in turn, Hamas is saying to Israel, I know that these people are important to you. I know every live hostage is important to you. So I'll give me this, and I'll take that much more. That's unfortunately the ridiculous game that is being played in the Middle East.
Dr. Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor at UCI, also part of the Israel Institute Fellow. We always appreciate your time here at Live Now from Fox. We look forward to welcoming you back as we continue to see the latest developments, of course, every day. It seems like something new, especially tonight, that we know that the fighting will continue, that pause will continue, for that hostage and prisoner exchange to continue as well.
Thank you.